Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. Folks, we've made it. Long ago, I set up many goals to bolster my Patreon, and with great mirth and joviality, I am happy to announce that we've reached that first milestone. It is so incredible that this many people have decided that I'm worthy of their time and effort. I think it's every creator's dream to have an audience that has their back like this. So before anything else, a big, heartfelt thanks goes out to all of you. I wouldn't be here if not for you, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to show my gratitude with a promise a long time in the making. Premiering in the November 2014 core set, The New Challengers, Sora Purse's signature strategy was released to the public and is the perfect representative of the deck itself. Because while on the surface, the cute and adorable Fluffals may seem like just another dip into the bucket of cute aesthetics to build a mechanic around, within lies a darkness more twisted and sadistic than you could possibly comprehend with your puny, mortal brain. Stuffed animals with blades coming out of them! And let me tell you, we were about as primed as we were gonna get for a horror archetype that featured a rotating cast of defunct plush animals, including a giant bear. After all, Five Nights at Freddy's had only just come out a few months prior, at least in the TCG. Its original release date actually predates FNAF in the OCG, so I guess we were all just jonesing for Ursine-related violence in the mid-2010s, huh? Funny trivia aside, this theme has been playable from day one as either its own pure deck or as an engine and other themes looking to fusion summon, or even just draw a bunch of cards. We've got a lot of fluff to get through, so let's not delay any longer. It's time to talk about the tough puffs with a little bit of edge to them. Welcome to Frightfur Explained. Real quick before we get started, I wanted to let you all know that my next milestone is 200 patrons, and we'll be doing DDs for that one. The Declan Akubo ones, not the random DM-era banishment ones. I'm also expanding that scope to include YouTube memberships, and I even recently added a $1 tier to my Patreon. That's right, for just $1, you can help make a dent in this next milestone and help keep the channel running strong. Higher tiers also come with early access to my videos, a patron segment of my Discord, and even a way to have a say in what I cover each month. Thank you all so much for your continued support, and now, back to the video. So what's the deal with the whole Fluffal Frightfur Edge Imp thing? Well, that basically kind of sums it up. We've got three categories of cards that sometimes have some overlap, but in general, the Fluffals are fairy monsters that make up a majority of our main deck and are one half of our fusion requirements. Edge Imps are the other half, this time being Dark Fiends, with the Frightfurs being the fiendish fusion payoff. So we'll go over each category individually before moving on to our spells and traps. We'll be kicking things off with Fluffals, and that journey begins with Fluffal Cat, a level 1 earth monster with 700 attack and 300 defense, and if this card is sent to the grave as fusion material for a fusion summon, you can target a polymerization in your grave and add it to your hand. This is the first in a long line of polymerization specific support that you can find in the theme, because for whatever reason, this deck just loves vanilla polymerization. So if you use it to make a fusion monster here, if Cat was included, you basically get to buy back the fusion spell you used. It also has a bit of a counterpart in Fluffal Rabbit, a level 1 earth fairy monster with 300 attack and a 1200 defense, and if sent to the grave as fusion material for a fusion summon, you can target an Edge Imp Sabers or Fluffal monster in your grave, except a copy of this card, and add it to your hand. So you use Cat to get back Poly, and use Rabbit to get back your monsters. And my favorite part? These can be used to chain block the effects of your fusions, giving them that little extra bit of insulation. After all, if you're gonna make some big boss monsters, you've gotta make sure they have their stuffies. It's like rule number 1 of Frightfur Care. Fluffal Mouse is a level 1 earth monster with 100 attack and defense, and during your main phase, you can special summon up to 2 copies of Fluffal Mouse from your deck. This effect can only be used once while face up on the field, and you can't special summon monsters from the extra deck the turn you activate this effect, except Frightfur Monsters. Wow, they actually effectively future-proofed a card that summons a lot of material. What is that like? This is primarily here to help get a bunch of monsters into rotation to make use of the effects that scale with the amount of material used for its summon, and we'll get into a lot of those later in the video. That would be pretty keen, if not for the extra deck lock. Turns out the theme is actually very adept at accessing other extra deck options as well, so denying yourself those options isn't the most popular choice, which is a shame because if we could, then when combined with our last subject, we'd have ourselves a real game of cat and mouse. Fluffal Octopus is a level 1 water monster with 800 attack and defense, and when this card is normal or special summoned, you can target a Fluffal or Imp monster in your grave and add it to your hand. And if this card is sent to the grave as fusion material for the fusion summon of a Frightfur fusion monster, you can target up to 2 of your banished monsters and return them to the grave. This is one of our later arrivals, but it's nonetheless quite welcome. Recycling material so we can use it again has always been in style, and banishing cards as material has been a part of this strategy since the beginning, so having new ways to recycle them is a great boon. Probably wasn't the best idea to make it a water attribute monster though. Like, the theming is correct, but soggy and plush dolls don't really go well together. This thing's not going to be dry until late next year, at least. Fluffal Wings is a level 1 light monster with 100 attack and defense, and buckle up because things are about to get wild. If this card is in your grave and you control the card Toy Vendor, you can banish this card from your grave, then target a Fluffal monster in your grave. Banish it, and if you do, draw a card. Then you can send a Toy Vendor you control to the grave, and if you do, draw a card. What you're looking at is one of the most splashable draw engines in the whole game, should you have the room to accommodate it. But to really grasp how exactly it accomplishes that, we do have to talk about Toy Vendor specifically. It's a continuous spell card that, once per turn, lets you discard a card to draw a card and show that card to your opponent. Then, if it's a Fluffal monster, you can special summon any monster from your hand, not just the revealed Fluffal. Otherwise, discard the card you drew. If this card is sent to the grave, you can add an Imp Sabers or Fluffal monster from your deck to your hand. So if the effect and the art didn't give it away, this is basically a gacha machine. Well, okay, technically it's more of a physical capsule one, but you get the idea. Pay the discard cost, check the top card of your deck, which is like cracking open that capsule, and if it's a Fluffal, you won the prize. Otherwise, you just lose the new card. We do have some cards that help us rig the top of our deck in our favor so we can resolve this properly, which does come up from time to time. But the most important part is that last effect, letting you grab any member of your Fluffal lineup, as well as one of the better Edge Imp monsters. So if you have another Fluffal in your graveyard already, or if you have Wings in grave already, you can have Toy Vendor pitch the half you don't have in the grave. Then no matter what you flip off the top, you're still gonna win big. Because now you can banish the Wings and the other Fluffal for a draw, send the Vendor to grave for the second draw, and because Vendor was just sent to the grave, you can add a Fluffal monster or Edge of Sabers from your deck to your hand, including a monster we'll get into in just a bit that can help you get this restarted again. And while the draw from Wings is once per turn, the Toy Vendor search is not, leading to some hilarious situations where you can pitch a Toy Vendor to guarantee a search, or better yet, finding one off the top of your deck. Either way, you get the search. Wings and Vendor form a little draw engine that doesn't require anything but the deck space to run, making it a very popular rogue option, at least for a time. And we aren't even done talking about it yet. The third member of this group will be swinging by in just a bit, but at the risk of spoiling things, just know that anything is possible if you have a wing and a bear. Patchwork Fluffal is a level 1 Earth monster with 0 attack and defense that's also treated as a Frightfur monster while face up on the field. This card on the field can be used as a substitute for any one fusion material whose name is specifically listed on a Frightfur fusion monster, but the other material must be correct. Now, a number of our fusions actually require specific Edge Imps to work. Heck, some even need specific Fluffals. So Patchwork can act as any of them to help bridge the gap. And because it's searchable off of Vendor as well as other cards, this could have been a great way to smooth over the issue of needing those specific monsters. But the problems crop up when you read the fine print, as it only acts as substitute material while on the field, meaning you're not able to just fuse it from hand for the full benefit. You actually have to find a way to get it onto the board. Heck, even acting as a Frightfur card is contingent on it being on the board for whatever edge cases that was relevant for. If Patchwork came with some other extra effect, I could see this being a very popular pick, but as it stands, we just have better options to work with. And that may have been for the best. The texture pack on this one seems to be a bit out of whack. This may need a bit more time and quality assurance. Fluffal Angel is a level 2 light pendulum monster, oh this is gonna be good, with 600 attack, 1200 defense, and a scale of 8. As a pendulum spell, you can target a Fluffal or Edge Imp monster in your grave and special summon it. Also, you can't special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of the turn, except fusion monsters, even if this card leaves the field. As a monster, you can tribute it, then target a Frightfur fusion monster in your grave, and as part of the effect, discard a card, and if you do, special summon the targeted monster. This piece of support originated from the Arc V manga, where they got a little spicier with the pendulum inclusions. As a spell, it has these same limiting factors as Mouse does, and as a monster, it is nice to have a way to summon back your Frightfur fusions. You do invest a lot into them, but there's a twist. While a complete pendulum scale would mean you could bring back Angel every turn, tributing it again and again to get back your Frightfur fusions, you you would A, need those complete scales on top of the rest of your highly resource-intensive fusion summons, and B, still requires a discard to use every time you want to activate it, so the revival is anything but free. If some future support shows up that recontextualizes the pendulum aspect, like how the recent Predaplant support did, this could garner a second look. But if I need an angel for this deck, I know exactly who I'm gonna call. I keep Cherubini on speed dial. Fluffal Owl is a level 2 Earth monster with 1000 attack and defense, and when this card is normal or special summoned from the hand, you can add a polymerization from your deck to your hand. You can also pay 500 life points to fusion summon a Frightfur fusion monster from your extra deck, using monsters from your hand or field as fusion material. But you can only use one effect of this card per turn, and only once per turn. This is a means by which you can fusion summon, primarily by getting polymerization into play if you don't already have it. Or, as I've been fond of doing, using it as a way to scout for Ash Blossoms if you do already have polymerization. But what if you don't have polymerization and you're worried the search will get ashed? No worries, that's what the second effect is here for. It's a bit more restrictive, you won't be summoning Guardian Chimera off of it, but you'll still have access to your core Frightfurs, and at the end of the day, that's really all that matters. It's a very thoughtful card, not just in its mechanical design, but also its art. All of the Fluffals have little angel wings, and while Owl has regular bird wings, take a closer look and you'll see they made its little eyebrow crests into little angel wings. Owls, that for attention to detail. Fluffal Sheep is a level 2 Earth monster with 400 attack and 800 defense, and if you control a Fluffal monster except a copy of Fluffal Sheep, you can special summon this card from your hand. You can also return one other Fluffal monster you control to the hand to special summon an Egypt monster from your hand or grave. This is stellar for helping you get your Egypts back into rotation, as well as recycling the effects of your Fluffals. We've already seen that Octopus and Owl get you something when summoned to the field, and we've got plenty more where that came from coming up soon. Or heck, you can just use it as extra link material. Making Cross Sheep with this has got to be some kind of flavor win, right? Like the judge will give you extra points for it. Not to mention that Cross Sheep actually does have fantastic synergy with fusion decks. Point is, it may not seem like a high impact card on the surface, and for the most part you are right, but if you have some of these lying around and need to fill out some space in your Fluffal list, don't be sheepish about trying this out. Fluffal Bear is a level 8 Earth monster with 1200 attack and 800 defense, and you can send this card from your hand to the grave to set a toy vendor directly from your deck to your spell and trap zone. You can also tribute this card, then target a polymerization in your grave and add it to your hand. But you can only use one effect of this card per turn, and only once per turn. That last effect is pretty niche, but when you need it, you'll be glad you had it, as one extra fusion spell could mean the difference between a win and a loss. But that's not the important part. The real reason you play this is to give you more access to Toy Vendor. In fact, it's better than drawing Toy Vendor, because now you have a barren graveyard to work with the wings you can pitch off of Toy Vendor to get the draws off of Wing. And like I said previously, when you get that search off of Vendor, you can grab Bear, and now you have 2/3 of all the cards you need to do it again next turn. Resolve this a few times, and your opponent will know the true meaning of despair. Fluffal Dog is a level 4 Earth monster with 1700 attack and 1000 defense, and when this card is normal or special summoned from the hand, you can add an Egypt Sabers or a Fluffal monster from your deck to your hand, except a copy of this card. Everyone, I present to you our Stratos. Not only does this get you just the right Fluffal at just the right time, this grabs you Bear for Toy Vendor shenanigans. But remember, this effect only triggers when summoned from the hand. Reviving it from grave or summoning it right out of the deck will have no effect. Though this does mean it works well with Toy Vendor's special summon because you draw the card first before special summoning it. It's one of the backbones of our deck and is quite fetching, wouldn't you say? Fluffal Dolphin is a level 4 water monster with 1600 attack and 1000 defense, and it can target a toy vendor in your grave and set it to your field. And if you do, send a Fluffal monster or Egypt Sabers from your deck to the grave. And if this card is sent to the grave as fusion material for a fusion summon, you can shuffle into the deck one of your fusion spells or polymerization spells that are banished or is in your grave. This is another recent arrival, and I love it. Recycling Toy Vendor while setting up your grave is about as sick as it gets, and recycling our fusion-capable spells gives us more longevity, and gives you extra uses of cards like Super Polymerization if needed. And since you can nab this off of Toy Vendor itself when it's sent to the grave, this is almost always available when you have one in your grave. It truly is a tubular monster. Fluffal Leo is a level 4 Earth monster with 1600 attack and 1200 defense, and when this card declares an attack, it gains 500 attack until the end of the battle phase, bumping it to a sick 2100. That's Cyber Dragon stats, which is pretty neat on a normal summon. But aside from that, it doesn't really accomplish much. It really is riding off the force of personality given to it by that enormous, adorable face, and let me tell you, it's getting pretty close to working. Fluffal Penguin is a level 4 water monster with 1600 attack and 1100 defense, and during your main phase, you can special summon a Fluffal monster from your hand except a copy of this card, an effect that can only activate once while this card is face up on the field. If this card is sent to the grave as fusion material for the fusion summon of a Frightfur fusion monster, you can draw 2 cards, then discard a card. Now, I've said this about a lot of monsters, but I really love this card. While we don't generally need to summon a monster alongside Penguin for our fusion gameplay, it does technically fix the issue with Patchwork Fluffal, but the general idea is that it still gets you the on-summon effects of your monsters like Dog while opening up your rank 4 toolbox. The fact that it's a water to boost Abyss Dweller is also pretty swanky, and if used as fusion material, as it was presumably meant to be used, you can dig deeper into your deck while giving yourself a discard outlet. And for all the great cards we've talked about so far that take advantage of that, we've still got even more in store. And just you wait until the tech pick section comes up, because the fact that this belongs to the Penguin archetype, a video you should totally check out by the way, lets us do some silly stuff. Almost makes you forget that we're about to fill this little guy with a bunch of tiny knives. Alright, that covers our Fluffals. Now it's time to take a look at our Dark Fiend Edge Imps, the creatures that truly bring out the worst in our best. And our first one is easily the most iconic. Edge Imp Sabers is a level 3 monster with 1200 attack and 800 defense, and if this card is in your grave, you can place a card from your hand on top of your deck to special summon this card in defense position. So far, we've seen a lot of Fluffals that name this card specifically, and a lot of our early fusions need this card as material and no other Edge Imps. And with an effect that resummons itself, you can get a lot of mileage out of just a single copy. Heck, if we set a Fluffal on top of our deck, we did just guarantee Toy Vendor will resolve successfully. But this wouldn't be the extent of its legacy. In combination with the card Mathematician, it was a 1-card rank 3, disregarding the card you'd have to set on top of your deck to summon it. And even if you weren't playing that particular spellcaster, this was a fantastic inclusion in any rank 3 deck that utilizes the graveyard. With how good this card is, I'm scared to see what cards like Edge Imp Lancer or Edge Imp Rider can do. Edge Imp Saw is a level 3 monster with 500 attack and 1000 defense, and when this card is normal summoned, you can send a Fluffal monster from your hand to the grave to draw 2 cards, then place a card from your hand on either the top or bottom of your deck. So while this card does say draw 2, it's more like hand fixing than actually generating card advantage, cause you have to pitch the Fluffal monster and put back a card. It is another way to stack your deck, and I'm not gonna say no to good, affordable hand fixing, but the normal summon makes this very clunky. This is another Edge Imp we have to play to gain access to a particular fusion, but this card's lackluster effect does make me yearn for a more playable Patchwork Fluffal, so we could just skip over this. Though it going in the opposite direction and, say, sending a Fluffal from deck to grave instead to special summon itself from hand may be a bridge too far, cause then we'd have a circular Saw, and we all know what R&D thinks about circulars. Edge Imp Scythe is a level 3 monster with 1000 attack and 0 defense, and during your opponent's main phase, as a quick effect, you can reveal this card in your hand to fusion summon a Frightfur fusion monster from your extra deck, using monsters from your hand or field as fusion material, including this card in your hand. And if any number of Frightfur fusion monsters you control would be destroyed by a battle or card effect, you can banish this card from your grave instead. We just keep looking at truly wild cards, don't we? So, one of the things you'll find out about Frightfurs is that you generally want to be going second. A lot of our payoffs involve destroying cards and dealing lots of battle damage, neither of which are useful going up against an empty board when you don't have a battle phase. But this means our opponent gets to set up with very little interaction from our end. At least, until this card came along. Edge Imp Scythe gave you a turn 0 play that was effectively a fusion hand trap. And while we won't get into the specifics for a little while longer, just trust that this comes with some serious removal. And it even comes with a protection effect that's specific to that monster, but in general can keep your monsters safe. It's a really good way to throw your opponent a curveball. Edge Imp Chain is a level 4 monster with 1200 attack and 1800 defense, and when this card declares an attack, you can add an Edge Imp Chain from your deck to your hand. And if this card is sent from the hand or field to the graveyard, you can add a Frightfur card from your deck to your hand. You can only use one effect of this card per turn, and only once per turn. This is arguably one of our best Edge Imps in a modern setting. There are a lot of good Frightfur cards we can search out with this, and once one particular spell got released, it ended up making this another splashable pick in a variety of fusion decks. The fact that it also makes for great level 4 material when it comes to Xyz summons, and randomly gets you a replacement if you have to go on the offensive with this, just keeps adding to its allure. You know, just in case you have to go on a bit of a chain beatdown. Edge Imp Frightfuloid is a level 4 monster with 1300 attack and defense that is always treated as a Frightfur card. You can target a Frightfur fusion monster you control or that's in your grave, and this card's attack and defense each become equal to the original attack and defense of that monster until the end of the turn. So it's a monster that belongs to 2 of our mini archetypes, which is kinda cool in regards to being used as fusion material, and can otherwise become a vanilla version of our boss monsters, taking on their battle stats, but none of their effects, which is, feels very lacking. Not to mention, I feel very uncomfortable looking at this thing. I get all the stitching supplies and whatnot and other cards, but once you bring the pencils in here, this is swiftly becoming the world's most messed up desk bot. Let's, move on to the next one, please. Edge Imp Tomahawk is a level 4 monster with 1800 attack and 800 defense, and you can send an Edge Imp monster from your hand to the grave to burn your opponent for 800 damage, so you'll never have to worry about not having a new Kazi ever again. It can also send an Edge Imp monster from your deck to the graveyard, except Edge Imp Tomahawk, to have this card's name become the sent monster's name until the end phase. That's right, we have Cowboy for game right in the main deck, but its stronger effect is easily the one that sets up your grave with any Edge Imp. Oh, hello Sabers, good to see you again. But none of these have ever been useful enough to make the deck profile, and I wouldn't be surprised if you axed it from your own list. Edge Imp Cotton Eater is a level 7 pendulum monster with 2400 attack and 1600 defense with a scale of 1. As a spell card, all fusion monsters you control gain 300 attack, and once per turn, if any number of Frightfur fusion monsters are fusion summoned to your field except during the damage step, you can draw a card. As a monster, if this card is special summoned, you can inflict 200 damage to your opponent for each Frightfur monster in your grave. So every time you pendulum summon this, it could potentially be dealing a big chunk of damage to your opponent, and is a bit of an advantage engine whenever you fusion summon. But once again, to take full advantage of this card, you have to set up scales, and while 1 is a very favorable one, and a level of 7 makes it compatible with some cool level 3 tuners, it doesn't really do enough to really warrant a slot in your deck. Edge Imp enjoyers are definitely not eating tonight. That does it for the Edge Imps. Now it's time for our fusion monsters, the Frightfurs. Well, mostly extra deck. As the manga is like to do, it's throwing another wrench into my otherwise perfect execution of this explanation. But they are still a fiend, so at least that's consistent. Frightfur Monsters is a level 8 Dark Pendulum monster with 0 attack and defense and a scale of 4. As a spell card, you contribute a level 4 or lower Frightfur, Fluffal, or Edge Imp monster to special summon from your deck a fiend monster with the same level, but a different name. As a monster, during your main phase, you can special summon a level 4 or lower Frightfur, Fluffal, or Edge Imp monster from your deck, but you can't special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of the turn, except fusion monsters. You can also tribute 2 or more fiend monsters to special summon a Frightfur fusion monster from your extra deck, whose levels equal the combined level of those monsters, and this is treated as a legit fusion summon. Which is a funny thing to mention since this sounds exactly like a synchro summon. Is this just harmonic synchro fusion years before its actual release? But as a level 8 pendulum monster in a theme whose scales cap out at 8, its monster effect isn't used quite so often. As a pendulum spell though, there are some funny applications. It's searchable off of Frightfur Chain, and its ability to turn any of our on-theme monsters, at least from level 4 or lower, into any fiend of its same level means it's always gonna have some fringe utility. I mean, as a fiend with 0 attack and defense, you can also grab this with Nightmare Throne, so keep a lookout for the Yubel crowd. Not only that, but it's absolutely killing it with that design. A little skeleton with a hoodie and blue eyes? That's gonna catch on, mark my words. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that Meister would also love a good pun or two. Oh, skeleton after my own heart it is. Frightfur Sheep is a level 5 Dark Fusion monster with 2000 attack and defense, requiring Edge Imp Chain and one or more Fluffal Monsters as material. If this card battles, your opponent can't activate cards or effects until the end of the damage step. If this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the grave, or if this card in your possession is destroyed by an opponent's card effect and sent to the grave, you can special summon this card, and if you do, it gains 800 attack. That's actually really nasty, and Armades with 2800 attack is no joke, and having a free reborn once per turn at that means this isn't the easiest monster to get rid of if you don't have banishing effects. And its materials are pretty solid too. Chain is already a great monster to send to grave regardless, why not also have it be used as one half of possibly our greatest offensive threat, at least in terms of attacking other monsters. And while it's not the biggest application, you can summon this off of instant fusion in case you need a spare Frightfur's fusion material. And who knows, your opponent may destroy it so you can get it back, attack boost and all. You could say that Frightfur Sheep is unmatched in its sheer power. Frightfur Bear is a level 6 Dark Fusion monster with 2200 attack and 1800 defense, requiring Edge Imp Sabers and a Fluffal Bear as material. When this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the grave, you can equip that monster as an equipped spell with this effect. The equipped monster gains 1000 attack. So all it takes is for you to run over a single monster, and this turns into a combat juggernaut, dealing with just about any threat, growing stronger with each victory. Sadly though, just being able to get big isn't gonna cut it, even back when it was first released. It also doesn't have the most forgiving of material requirements, needing 2 specific ones, where most of our monsters only need 1, if that. And when it comes to Edge Imp Saber's usage, we've already got stiff competition, so Bear here just isn't up to snuff. But considering how well the giant bear with evil that lurks within is doing at its sister location, I wouldn't feel too bad for it. Frightfur Tiger is a level 6 Dark Fusion monster with 1900 attack and 1200 defense, requiring an Edge Imp Sabers and one or more Fluffal Monsters as material. When this card is fusion summoned, you can target cards on the field up to the number of material used for this card's summon and destroy them. It also boosts the attack of all Frightfur monsters you control by 300 for each Frightfur and Fluffal monster you control. Also, you can only control a single copy of this card, which means we can't summon multiple to stack that boost, which is a shame because those kinds of multiplying bonuses are deadly. But I guess we're just gonna have to settle for the one of them. Oh well, woe is us. Anyway, this card is fantastic, letting us trade in any number of material for removal, popping at least 2 cards. And if you fused away anything that has an effect when used as fusion material, you're gonna make up for that cost really quickly, while your opponent is gonna be left wondering how to rebuild. It's an attack booster and a board wipe all rolled into one, making for some very frightful symmetry. Frightfur Wolf is a level 6 Dark Fusion monster with 2000 attack and 1500 defense, also requiring an Edge Imp Sabers and any number of Fluffal Monsters as material. It must be fusion summoned with the above material and cannot be special summoned by other means, which makes sense because its effect lets you attack a number of times per turn up to the number of material used for its summon. This is our designated game ender, no doubt about it. Load 4 material into this and it can do 8k damage all on its own. And the fact that it has the same material requirements as Tiger means from the same position you can choose to swing in for game or topple a board, whichever you need at the time. Just make sure you put out plenty of fodder for it, because when it comes to material, it really wolfs it down. Frightfur Leo is a level 7 Dark Fusion monster with 2400 attack and 2000 defense, requiring an Edge Imp Saw and a Fluffal monster as material. It must be fusion summoned and cannot be special summoned by other ways. You can target a face-up monster your opponent controls, destroy it, and if you do, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the destroyed monster's original attack. But this card can't attack directly the turn you activate this effect. If you're familiar with the monster Volcasaurus, this reads basically the same, and it's a pretty strong effect. Removal and burn all in one, and it doesn't even stop you from attacking entirely. All you have to do is run this into the opponent's monster if they have any left to maximize that damage. Sadly, since you have to use Saw, this card doesn't see a lot of play, and if we need a card gone, we're more than happy to use Tiger for that job, even if it lacks the burn damage. Maybe one day we'll get an Edge Imp substitute worth playing, or heaven forbid we gain easy access to Muddy Muddragon, but for now, we're not going to be able to play this particular game. Sorry, Jigsaw. Frightfur Chimera is a level 8 dark monster with 2800 attack and 2000 defense, requiring 3 Frightfur Monsters as material. It must be fusion summoned and cannot be special summoned by other means. If this card battles, your opponent can't activate cards or effects until the end of the damage step, and when this card destroys a monster by battle and sends it to the grave, you can special summon that monster to your field, but its attack is halved. Also, this card gains 300 attack for each monster you control that is owned by your opponent. This is an odd duck in the Frightfur family, and considering our company, you know that's saying something. It's touted as the big boss of the earlier iterations of the deck, and yeah, an Armade's Goyo Guardian that gets bigger the more you steal sounds like a humongous threat. But double check those material requirements real quick. Yep, that's right. If this needed 3 Fluffal Monsters, this would be a steal. But 3 Frightfurs means we need to churn through 3 of our extra deck offers, either by playing them or sending them directly to the graveyard, or playing monsters like Imp Frightfuloid and Patchwork Fluffal, and we've already gone over how those aren't exactly viable. This is basically like the Contrast Hero Chaos of the team, a pretty decent monster locked behind unreasonable material requirements. I wouldn't be surprised if this card got the main focus in a future Frightfur update, specifically some kind of Duelist of Legend pack, but for now, you can pass this over pretty easily. Heck, maybe we'll even get an alt art that depicts this card as not being made of pre-made assets. This monster looks like it was ripped right out of Getting Over It. Frightfur Daredevil is a level 8 dark fusion monster with 3000 attack and 2200 defense, requiring an Imp monster and a Fluffal monster as material. When this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can burn them for 1000 damage. And if this face-up card is destroyed by battle or leaves the field because of an opponent's effect while in its owner's control, it can burn your opponent for 500 damage for each Frightfur monster in your grave. This is one of the simplest, most cost-efficient fusions in our roster. 1 Imp and 1 Fluffal. And you might expect something that cheap to be bad, but it's actually kinda decent. While being a sack of burn damage isn't going to flip the competitive scene on its head anytime soon, Daredevil is a 3000 attack body in a pinch that does a lot to help you close out games, and its floating effect has very few ways to counteract it. Only sending it back to the extra deck can keep its retaliation from going off, though it does depend on you setting up a grave full of Frightfurs to make this really sting, which is what keeps this from being a major contender. Feel free to use this card to punish the Dogmatica players that keep shredding your extra deck, but when it comes to unique applications, that's about the only idea I have to pitchfork to you. Frightfur Kraken is a level 8 water fusion monster with 2200 attack and 3000 defense, requiring an Imp monster and a Fluffal monster as material. Once per turn, you can target a monster your opponent controls and send it to the grave, but this card can't attack directly this turn. It can make a second attack during the battle phase of each turn, and once per turn during the end phase. If this card battled, you can change it to defense position. Now this is one heck of a chomper. It does a little bit of everything. It comes with removal like Tiger and Leo, it can attack a bunch like with Wolf, all with the fusion materials as easy to gather as Daredevil. And despite its below average stats for such a high leveled fusion monster, you can still go on the offensive with this and defensive because it can switch to defense position kinda like Dante does. This card is a great all around problem solver, usable at basically any point in the game. It's official folks, Kraken here is pretty cracked. Frightfur Sabretooth is a level 8 dark fusion monster with 2400 attack and 2000 defense, requiring a Frightfur fusion monster and 1 or more Fluffal and or Imp monsters as material. When this card is fusion summoned, you can target a Frightfur monster in your grave and special summon it, and while on the field, all Frightfur monsters you control gain 400 attack. And if this card is fusion summoned using 3 or more fusion material, it can't be destroyed by battle or card effects. This is another pretty sturdy monster to keep in your lineup. Needing a Frightfur fusion as material seems pretty steep, but it's a lot better when you get to bring that monster right back, this time with a little extra attack from Sabretooth's continuous effect. While not as potent as Tiger's bonus, an extra 400 can go a long way. This is another reason to play Instant Fusion, because if you use Sheep as material, you can revive it with Sabretooth, lifting any restrictions the Cup Noodle imposed. And, if nothing else, because of its protection against battle and effect destruction, you can use it as a wall to stall your opponent, forcing them to use alternative methods of getting this off the board. It's not good all the time, needing that third material to gain the bonus protection can be a little rough, but can still be summoned with his fused 2 material while amping up your offense. It's a really solid inclusion, even if it's getting a little long in the Sabretooth. Frightfur Cruel Whale is a level 9 water fusion monster with 2600 attack and 2400 defense, requiring an Imp monster and a Fluffal monster as material. If this card is fusion summoned, you can destroy a card on both players' fields. Once per turn, as a quick effect, you can target a fusion monster you control to send a Frightfur card from your deck or extra deck to the graveyard, except a copy of this card, and if you do, the targeted monster gains attack equal to half of its own original attack until the end of the turn. And just to clarify, we're talking about the fusion monster you're targeting, not the cards you send. Especially because you can send non-monster Frightfur cards. So remember back when we talked about how Imp Scythe was basically a hand trap? Well, take a look, because this is what we were talking about. Slam this down during your opponent's turn and you get to pop their highest priority card. You do have to take care of one of your own cards to do it, but that's not a problem because Scythe can banish itself to protect your whale. And the violence doesn't end there. Not only can this deceptively turn into a 3900 attack monster out of nowhere, it can grant that boost to any other fusion we run. We'll ignore any funny interactions with, say, Shadalls or Invoked monsters, but even just boosting Kraken to 3300 gives you a wild double attack, and Wolf going up to 3k means it only needs 3 material to solo a win. I'm telling you, if you wanted to write a research paper on this archetype, you'd have to start with this card. It wouldn't be complete without the Cruel Whale's thesis statement, after all. Dangerous Frightfur Nightmare is a level 10 monster with 2000 attack and 3000 defense, requiring an Imp monster and 2 Fluffal monsters as material. It gains 300 attack for each fairy and fiend monster in your grave during your turn only, and when this fusion summoned card destroys a monster by battle, you can send Frightfur, Fluffal, and or Imp monsters from your deck to the grave, equal to the original level of the destroyed monster. And when your opponent activates a card or effect that targets this card on the field as a quick effect, you can banish a Frightfur monster from your extra deck to negate that effect. I'm not thrilled that it banishes the Frightfur, but targeting protection is targeting protection. That being said, this card is pretty meh. It's got less utility, using more material than many of our monsters, and only gets big once you have a big graveyard, which is funny because its battle trigger is there to fill up your grave. An effect that will totally whiff if you're battling against Xyz or Link monsters. This is about as win more as it gets, which means it's way more dangerous to you than it is to your opponent. Alright, that covers all of our monsters. Now it's time for the spells and traps, and we get to start with one of our most famous, Frightfur Fusion, a normal spell card that fusion summons a Frightfur Fusion monster from your extra deck by banishing fusion material listed on it from your field or grave. This is going to be our bread and butter card. Generally, we'll be fusing monsters normally with polymerization, then double dipping with that material using Frightfur Fusion. This makes the prospect of making Chimera a little better, but it's still nowhere near worth it. Banishing a ton of material to get a huge pop out of Tiger is just way too satisfying an opportunity to pass up. And being searchable off of Frightfur Chain ain't half bad either. But I don't think the designers realized that by making this card, they have obligated themselves into making all these little component monsters into real ones someday. I desperately need Fluffal Dragon, Puppet, and whatever nasty little freak this purple one is. Frightfur Patchwork is a normal spell card that adds an Imp monster and a polymerization from your deck to your hand. That's not a lot of text, but trust me, it's bananas, because it gets you one of the cards you want to be running as few copies of as possible and a way to fuse. And as long as you don't need a specific Imp, you can grab Chain, which when sent to the grave will get you a Frightfur card, which can be Patchwork, setting you up to do this all over again next turn. Because sadly, this does have a hard once per turn clause on it. This card is outrageous, and it's honestly a crime that it took so long for it to reach the TCG. We would have had a much different 2016, let me tell you. Also, you know how I was saying I wanted a better Chimera? Look at this! Perfect representation of the source material. Where was this design work when making our fusion? Sid would be proud. Frightfur Reborn is a normal spell card that targets a Frightfur monster in your grave and special summons it. And during your main phase, except the turn this card was sent to the grave, you can banish this card from your grave, then target one of your banished Fluffal or Frightfur monsters and return it to the grave. That last effect is executed much better with Fluffal Octopus, which leaves us with that first effect, and it's fine. The bad news is that some of our Frightfurs can't be summoned by this at all, namely Wolf and Leo, and we won't get the full value out of cards like Tiger. Granted, it will still give you the radical attack boost, and both Kraken and Whale have utility even if not fusion summoned, but honestly, I'd rather this bear just stay gone. But you can't keep a good bear out once they've gotten in. Maybe there was some kind of security breach. Frightfur Repair is a normal spell card that targets a Frightfur Fusion monster in your grave and returns it to the extra deck. Then you can special summon a Fluffal or Imp monster from your graveyard. You can banish this card from your grave to special summon a Fluffal or Imp monster from your hand, but you can only use one effect of this card per turn and only once per turn. This is a bit better than Reborn, since it recycles the fusion, which means it works on ones that we can't normally special summon, while getting you one of your main deck monsters back, potentially giving you a strong starter to keep up your plays. And on a turn you don't need that, you can banish this from grave to accelerate monsters out of your hand. It doesn't do quite enough to warrant usage, at least at the moment, but I could see it being incorporated into a combo down the line. Though if they manage to make that a real thing, I'll be in stitches. Suture Rebirth is a normal spell card that targets a Fluffal or Frightfur monster in your grave and special summons it, but its effects are negated. Oh, great, so largely the reason we'd even want to revive them, and that feature is left on the cutting room floor. Cool. This could potentially still work with Frightfur Sheep. Once it's destroyed, it'll be in a place where you can activate its effects again, reviving it without any of the chaff, and maybe the extra material can be used for a Fusion, Xyz, or Link play, but I'd rather just play a card that does all that and lets you have the monster's effects. Maybe there's a long, drawn-out explanation of why this card is good, but I really don't have time to be reading that kind of a thread. Toy Parade is a normal spell card that is always treated as a Frightfur card. It targets a dark monster you control, special summon from the extra deck, and for the rest of the turn, you can't declare attacks except with that monster, and each time it destroys a monster by battle and sends it to the grave, it can attack again in a row. If you control a fairy monster, except the turn this card was sent to the grave, you can also banish this card from your grave to add a level 4 or lower dark monster from your grave to your hand. You can only use one effect of this card per turn, and only once per turn. So you can search this off of Chain if used as fusion material to make that monster a big multi-attacker, which feels odd. We already have a lot of multi-attackers in the theme as it turns out. Why would we limit ourselves to just one monster to attack with? This could potentially do wild stuff in conjunction with Daredevil, but it honestly feels like this would work best in decks that are not Frightfurs. You can use this on any extra deck summoned dark monster. Why not give it to Red Dragon Archfiend? Honestly, the big thing that's sending me is that this is a crossover with Princess Cologne's cards and what is that, Blockman? This is way too much, even for the lore guy. Next card, please. Frightfur Factory is a continuous spell card that has you banishing a polymerization spell card or fusion spell card from your grave, except a copy of Diffusion Wave Motion, love localizations, to fusion summon a Frightfur Fusion monster from your extra deck, using monsters from your hand or side of the field as fusion material. And if this card is sent to the grave from anywhere, you can target one of your banished Frightfur Fusions and add it to your hand. And just to clarify, it is talking about the card Frightfur Fusion, not any of our Frightfur Fusion monsters. This is interesting. Where Frightfur Fusion lets you cannibalize your monsters to make a big threat, Factory cannibalizes your fusion spells directly to make your fusions, and if you did so via Frightfur Fusion, you can get it back once it goes to the grave. It's a little bit too roundabout in regards to modern decks, but for its time, it was pretty nifty, though it does take away from the horror of the whole cute dolls being eviscerated and turned into night terrors, knowing that they come off of an assembly line. Next thing you know, there's going to be books and plushies and spin-off games, and then the whole novelty is going to wear off, to say nothing of the imitators that are going to crop up. Frightfur Sanctuary is a continuous spell card that you can activate by discarding a card and sending 2 Frightfur monsters from your extra deck to the grave. All fusion monsters you control are treated as Frightfur monsters, and if this card is sent to the grave, you can target a Frightfur fusion monster in your grave and return it to the extra deck. This is pretty funky. If you splash with any other fusion themes, Sanctuary ensures that your off-theme fusions benefit from Tiger and Sabertooth's attack boost. Though, because it only treats fusions you control as Frightfurs, you're not able to use spare fusions in your grave alongside Frightfur Fusion to help make Chimera. And by sending more Frightfurs to grave, Daredevil gets to do more damage when it leaves the field. Heck, you can even just use one of the sent Frightfurs as material with Frightfur Fusion to make Sabertooth. It even recycles one of your Frightfurs when it ends up in the grave, but I mean, this is a whole lot of nothing. It makes other cogs and wheels spin, which is fun, but without a Frightfur that has an Elder Entity Intis style effect that would benefit from being sent to the grave, Sanctuary is a lot of setup for no immediate payoff. You have to keep paying into it and setting up for it, and you know, Vernisylphs does this with much more aplomb with Corolla, and even that doesn't see widespread play. Also, how is this not a field spell? This is just a field spell. What is the point of that designation if they aren't going to use it? Designer Frightfur is a normal trap card that targets an Edge Imp or Fluffal monster in your grave and special summons it, and if you do, it can be treated as a Frightfur monster for a fusion summon. Well, I mean, when looking at Suture Reborn, I did say I wanted the monster to come back with their effect, and this does it, as well as treating it as a Frightfur monster for a fusion summon. Now, this means it's valid material for Chimera, but sadly, not necessarily for Sabretooth, because it specifies that it needs a Frightfur fusion monster as material, and Designer only modifies the name. That aside, we get a searchable card that revives our Fluffals to make use of their power, but as a trap card, it's still pretty low on the priority list. Just about every normal trap got a huge power buff with the release of Transaction Rollback, but that card has way better targets that are way more impactful, so burning it on Designer is just asking for trouble. But I can't deny that the image of Leo rising from the husk of its horrific evolution with the same blank, empty stare is just the best. He's just like me, for real, for real. Fluffal Crane is a normal trap card, and when any number of face-up Fluffal monsters you control are destroyed by your opponent's attack or card effect and sent to the grave, target one of those destroyed monsters, add it to your hand, and if you do, draw a card. That's actually really cool. Crane actually replaces itself so it resolves as a +1. The only problem is that, well, you've heard me complain about trap cards in general, and this just kinda gets you back resources during your opponent's time. Heck, it only triggers when Fluffals get hit, and I don't plan on anything but Frightfur sticking onto the board, so no thank you. I knew this thing was rigged. Fusion Fright Waltz is a normal trap card that targets a Frightfur fusion monster you control and a fusion monster your opponent controls. Destroy as many other special summoned monsters on the field as possible, then each player that had monsters destroyed by this effect takes damage equal to the combined current attack of the targeted monsters on the field. So the idea is that you have a lone fusion monster and punish your opponent for having a fusion, wipe their board of special summoned monsters, then burn them for a whole heap of damage, since you won't have any other monsters on the board. We're easily looking at around 4k damage between yours and your opponent's fusion, but the question is, if your opponent isn't on fusions, how do you even use this? Creature swap? Albion, the Sanctifier Dragon? Shien's Spy? This is about as anime import cards get, relegated to YouTube combo videos and little else, until some FTK invariably makes this viable. No, this is not an invitation to make Frightfur FTK, the format is bad enough as it is. Frightfur Jar is a continuous trap card whose name becomes Toy Vendor while on the field or in the grave. You can discard a card to draw a card and show it, then if it's an Edge Imp monster, you can destroy a card on the field. Otherwise, place a card from your hand on the top or bottom of the deck. And if this card is sent to the grave, you can target a face-up monster your opponent controls to have its attack until the end of the turn. Hey, a Toy Vendor alternative. Not that we were looking for one, a Toy Vendor is already rad as hell. And to be honest, Jar is pretty mid. It does come with removal, which is nice, but because you put a card into your deck when you whiff instead of sending it to the grave, there's a lot less incidental synergy with graveyard cards. And having something's attack can be very relevant for blunting an offensive push or helping us get over something. Heck, it even works with Fluffal Dolphin and Wings for all their effects, for what that's worth. So as a searchable card, you can do a lot worse, but you can certainly do better. Like one of the cards spawned from this one, Cap Shell. I mean, these have gotta be cap shells, right? They couldn't possibly have two Devil Capsule monsters in this game, it simply cannot be done. Frightfur March is a counter trap card that, when an opponent's spell or trap card or monster effect is activated that targets any number of Frightfur monsters you control, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. Then you can send one of the targeted Frightfur monsters to the grave, and if you do, special summon a level 8 or higher Frightfur fusion monster from your extra deck, which is treated as a proper fusion summon. And during your next end phase, banish the monster special summoned by this effect. So first, let's get the notable interactions out of the way. This can summon Frightfur Chimera. You will get the revive off of Sabretooth because the summon is a proper fusion summon, so you could potentially get that Frightfur monster back, and Cruel Whale will initiate the double pop. But is it worth running this? I don't think so. It's a counter trap that only stops cards targeting your Frightfur monsters, which means we can't use this to stop any of our opponent's plays that are just for themselves. The effect to swap out for another Frightfur is optional, so at the very least it's a protective counter trap, so it's nice to have the additional option. And because the monster is banished during your next end phase, if you activate this during your opponent's turn, you still get to keep the monster a little longer. And with Link monsters running around, it's pretty easy to cash that monster in before it gets banished. It seems strange, but honestly, with Sabretooth's existence, this really is mostly upside. The problem is just you know, the activation conditions. It's not bad, but at this point I'd rather just run the Solemn Judgments for the coverage. But I do admit, this has taken our mangled menagerie and looped them back around to being adorable again. Turns out, all they wanted was just to go on a walk. Who knew? Alright, so that's all of our Sora-related cards, but what do we do with them? Well, our long-term grind game wasn't really a consideration here. Our goal is to gather all of our little pieces, fuse together a big monster to help smash our opponent's field open, then use another fusion to end the game on the spot. One Frightfur fusion is really all it can take to close things out, so what we need are cards to help set us up for our one-turn kill, both in terms of gathering our resources and keeping our opponent from stopping us. So what can we play to help them out? There is something I've been sitting on for a while that I think is pretty rad. Royal Penguin's Garden. It's basically more copies of Fluffal Penguin, and I love how many archetypes cross over with those chilly birds. It doesn't have much other utility until we factor in another odd crossover with Eldritch the Golden Lord. Being spot removal and a gigantic monster all in one is pretty sweet, but needs a lot of spells and traps to feed it to make it viable. Well, Royal Penguin's Garden isn't doing anything after you activate it, so trade it in to summon a 3500 attack monster that resists effect destruction for 2 turns. And, as a bonus, is another way to send a toy vendor directly to the grave, whether it's in our hand or on the field. Dark World Accession is also a fantastic fusion spell to add to our arsenal. Despite the name, it can fusion summon any fiend fusion monster by banishing material from the field or grave. It's kind of like a quick effect Frightfur fusion in that regard, letting you use Tiger during your opponent's turn. Just be careful, remember that Tiger's on summon effect does miss timing, so don't chain Accession to literally anything. Need something to help draw out the game? Lower your opponent's ceiling? Well, with all the fairies you've got, especially with how many fairies you sent to grave, Archlord Christia is a great way to grind a game to a halt. It even gets you a fairy back on top of your deck to use for more effects. We mentioned Guardian Chimera earlier, and it is a strong inclusion. You get draws and removal, a gigantic monster that comes with protection as long as you've got polymerization in the grave. But are there any other fusions we can make with this most versatile of fusion effects? Protoplant Dragostapelia is pretty nice, only requiring a fusion and a dark monster, and quick effect negation of monsters on board is super strong. Meanwhile, Garura, Wings of Resonant Life, can do a lot of damage out of nowhere and can give you a little bit of card draw. And both of these last two are great vectors to use super polymerization. This card is just never getting hit, huh? Now, I can't believe this next one is not the silly tech pick, but a Hero Lives has some funny value here. Elemental Hero Prisma has had an outrageous amount of utility in fusion decks that have specific material, even seeing play as recently as with Visa's variants to dump that card into the grave to enable Vicious Astrolaud. Here, we can use it to send Edge of Sabers to set up its effect and its level 4 material for Xyz plays. If you don't use it for a fusion, that is. As for the real silly tech pick, this is gonna be a bit of a shameless plug, but Greater Polymerization. We've previously talked about this in a video I made talking about all of Greater Poly's best use cases, but Wolf can run into the issue against a non-open field where a flood of defensive monsters keeps you from dealing damage with all of those attacks. But with the piercing granted by Greater Poly, that won't be an issue, and gains a little extra protection to ensure this damage gets pushed through. Alright, that's all the info I have on Frightfurs, but how do they stack up against the Nova scale? Novelty. This was one of the fusion archetypes to debut shortly after Duelist Alliance, and when you compare them to Shaddoll, well, it's hard to compete with a deck that has the best fusion spell ever printed at the time. However, the archetype has aged very well, and has a cool twin archetype structure that leads into a third. I think the theme has done a lot to set the stage not just for fusions, but fusions that require specific material, showing off what can be done when you mix the specific and the general. So Frightfurs get a 3 in novelty. Objectivity. While the deck has the capacity to win games at the drop of a hat, it doesn't do it out of nowhere. Careful planning and execution is required to get the most out of this deck, and inventive brewing is going to be needed to keep up with a field of infinitely spawning link material and freely special summoned level 7 monsters that punish you if you ever touch monster effects. So I'm giving Frightfurs a 5 in objectivity. Versatility. This is a funny one because while we're largely self-contained, we have some cards that make for great additions to other decks. Frightfur Patchwork may be the most famous of them, effectively giving you a polymerization and a Dark Fiend to use as material for any fusion summon. And Frightfur Monsters means we have ways to splash in and with Fiend strategies. Combine this with incidental Xyz's utility, powerful links, and largely being free of archetypal locks, and it's hard to not give Frightfurs a 3 in versatility. Awesomeness. This may be the fusion player bias, it may be the Frightfur Patchwork branded experience at play, but this deck is outrageous. It's got a number of powerful tools at its disposal, a flexible game plan that never veers too hard into unfair territory, and it's got a penguin for crying out loud. All in all, Frightfurs are getting a 5 in awesomeness, which means it scores a total of 16 out of 20 on the Nova scale. And that's all I have to say about Frightfur. I'm so glad we've finally gotten a chance to scratch this off the list. I love this deck, and I know a fair few of you have been waiting to get your hands on this as well. And I'm sure this won't be the last we see of it. While it has had a fair share of recent updates, as an anime archetype, we're bound to see the devs dip back into the pool eventually. Whether it have its own chapter in an Animation Chronicles set, or new cards as part of a Legendary Duelist set. Or heck, just give it the core set treatment, why not? But no matter what, rest assured that it'll be more than equipped to beat the stuffing out of your opponent. But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Are Frightfurs still scary good, or are they in need of a good restitching? And which one's your favorite? As for me, look, I can't choose. Look at all these little fellas. If you can manage to pick just one, or even just a handful, let me know down below, and if you haven't already, please be sure to like the video if you liked it, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and share this video with somebody you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh! It really does a lot to help me out. Today's episode is brought to you by my lovely patrons, as well as the lovely people over at Dragon Shield. Get the sleeves as strong as dragon scales and save 5% on your order by using the coupon code GoldenNova at checkout. Today's episode was also brought to you by my lovely patrons, including this month's illustrious Quasar Commanders, the Critic of Innocence and Upstairs Media, Nebula Navigators 3rd Dynasty, Ada Basilisk, Adam Zajdel, Owexitowa Hime, Anansi Dragon, Andrew Newman, Kane Senpai, Chibi Gohan, Christopher Fuss, Clockswork, Comrade Copperbottom, Emony-chan, Eric, Aaron the World Breaker, Frankie, Garland Chaos, Green Knight, Gloomba 331, Great Big Pillock, Groog, Hairbear, Harry the Ominous Benefactor, Howling Zangetsu, Iron Zero, Iskander 711, Carp, Mana Charge, Marion James E. Picata, Megacombi, Millennia Asta, Muzuki Clark, Nathan Vig, Natiel Lee Alexander, Orozco 09096, Panther J, Rebel King Lucifer, Red Eyes Jackalow, RJ the Jank Monarch, Sammy Haim, Serenity Towns, Skybuster Leo, That One Dumbass and the Wizard Moose, Cosmic Crusaders Alpha Sly, Almento 5010, A Random Pup, Ariel Kersey, Berin von Titty Sprinkles, Beluga Master, Blitzwolf, Blue Gem, Borger with the Shotgun, Callum McCann, Chaz Ghost, Childish Lamar, Dr. Reaper RIP, Drachenwald, Eki Bullock, Eva Padilla, Hike Boyagian, Herbal D, Ignis Heat the True Draco Slayer, Inblink, Jester Designs, Kale the Dragon, Kevon Public, Lemon Yu-Gi-Oh!, Manga Pages, Matt Simmons, Mick Spoofy, Michael Shimabukuro, Nitromo, Obsidian, Ramen Resurrection, Seawing 22, Shizuka Nijimura, Sophie, apparently, Stephen Williamson, Taylor Seymour, Terror Top to 3, The Pokemon 52, The Legendary Raven and Zal Dreka, as well as the lovely Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. If you'd like to help me in my journey to cover all of Yu-Gi-Oh's archetypes, get my videos early, be a part of these credits and other awesome perks, it would mean the world to me if you could check out the link to my Patreon in the description or consider joining as a YouTube member. And if you'd like to see the power of Frightfur in action, check out this episode of Progression Polls where they get used frighteningly well. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.